The esteemed Prince Charming, who prides himself on his manners before the public, has been revealed by one of his former servants. And now, the entire world recognizes him as a morally corrupt and privileged heir to a throne. Watch this video to the conclusion to understand what and why Prince Andrew's former housekeeper disclosed about his true character. It is now entirely clear. He did not transform into a malevolent entity. He consistently exhibited malevolent tendencies. Charlotte Briggs was an individual who aspired to serve the royal family, and she believed that by offering a person love, they would invariably develop into a decent individual. However, she was mistaken on this occasion. What Charlotte failed to recognize was that, at times, circumstances can be so detrimental that, regardless of the care and affection invested in an egg, it will inevitably produce a serpent. This is the sequence of events in Prince Andrew's case. She was merely 21 years old when she entered Prince Andrew's realm, a domain that offered the allure of palace corridors and the honor of regal duty, yet ultimately compelled her to characterize her role as one that was universally undesirable. The explanation was straightforward. Behind the refined exterior of Buckingham Palace resided a man who was not the charismatic Duke of York once perceived by the public, but rather a figure whom his own staff openly regarded as arrogant, impolite, and unbalanced. In an interview with the Daily Mail, she promptly proceeded without delay. She expressed all her thoughts regarding Andrew. "I am indifferent to Prince Andrew's sentiments. He is an unpleasant and disagreeable individual." It was not the language of an individual seeking to temper her remarks. It was the most unfiltered testimony of an individual who had suffered years of degrading treatment. And as her accounts circulated, the world ultimately gained an unembellished insight into Andrew's true conduct in the absence of cameras. Her earliest recollections of the Duke were of him being indolent, entitled, and quickly provoked. In her account, Andrew frequently issued commands for activities he was capable of performing himself. Curtains evolved into one of his predominant obsessions. Heavy floor-to-ceiling drapes, which could have been readily drawn by himself, were instead the responsibility of Briggs. Once she created the slightest distance between them, the error, if it could be regarded as such, triggered a tantrum. Andrew hurried out of his office, calling out loudly down the corridor, his voice resonating with vulgarity. "Are you incapable of performing any task correctly?" he exclaimed, causing the young attendant to break into tears. It provided a brief insight into the power system that the staff confronted daily. In Andrew's household, errors were not permitted, regardless of their insignificance. Every action bore the burden of potential punishment. Briggs recollected moving through the rooms with an enduring dread of being detected. She acknowledged that she had taken every possible measure to avoid him. His presence was erratic. His temper was more severe. But it was not solely his temper that unsettled her. His unusual demands were so obsessive and humiliating that they bordered on the preposterous. The most notorious incident involved his collection of taxidermied animals. To outsiders, it appeared to be a charming eccentricity, a mature man holding onto elements of childhood. To those responsible for its maintenance, it was an arduous challenge. The Duke of York maintained a collection of 72 teddy bears, accompanied by a plastic hippopotamus and a black panther, and insisted that they be arranged with military discipline. No individual approached them without proper guidance. Laminated instruction sheets specified the arrangement of each toy, indicating which should be positioned at the rear, which belonged at the front, and where his two favorite bears should sit, consistently flanking his bed as sentinels. Briggs described dedicating an entire day to rigorous training solely focused on this ritual. A single mistake could provoke one of Andrew's notorious outbursts. His chamber itself appeared as a sanctuary dedicated to his own vulnerability. The embroidered pillows bearing the regal crest needed to be precisely centered following the rotation of the mattress. His pajamas were to be arranged with precise symmetry. The stuffed animals, after being displayed, were to be taken away prior to his slumber and then returned at dawn. Staff, Briggs included, frequently pondered what manner of man would require such treatment and what it revealed about his character. The media responded promptly to this matter. It subsequently exploited these narratives, depicting a matured monarch confined by developmental delays, reliant on young maids to calm his temper and safeguard the innocence of his teddy bears. However, for Briggs, it was not a matter to be taken lightly. She remarked that it was akin to strolling on eggshells each day. The depiction of a monarch weeping inconsolably over draperies and bears starkly contrasted with the composed demeanor he endeavored to maintain in public. His interactions with other attendants were even more unfavorable. Briggs characterized him as an individual who regarded palace staff with contempt, displaying neither gratitude nor courtesy, in stark contrast to Charles, Edward, and even Prince Philip, whom she recalled as respectful and gentlemanly. Andrew was distinguished by a uniquely severe disposition. It is not as though she was fabricating these accounts without basis. Other former employees disclosed similar information. An ex-maid recalled being compelled to hurriedly cross the room to draw the draperies, despite Andrew standing immediately beside her, solely to remind her of her subordinate position. Another characterized his demeanor as frigid and condescending during the most straightforward interactions. And yet, what rendered these revelations even more painful was their superfluous nature. Andrew was not encumbered by the obligations of his siblings. He did not possess the qualities of a prospective monarch. His role was primarily ceremonial at best and excessively indulgent at worst, yet he nonetheless required reverence from those beneath him. Charlotte Briggs's revelation extended beyond merely describing a man with a temper or juvenile idiosyncrasies. It pertained to a specific pattern, a man who derived satisfaction from humiliating others, who regarded service not as assistance but as submission, and who fostered an environment so noxious that even working within the palace became intolerable. And this marked merely the commencement. Actually, that is not the case. This was not the initial point. There was an aspect of Andrew that even Charlotte was aware of, and it all commenced at a very early age. From the outset, Andrew's character distinguished itself from that of his siblings, albeit not in a favorable manner. Where Charles was reserved and scholarly, and was persistent yet competent, Andrew appeared to exemplify something considerably less innocent. Even during his toddler years, palace personnel and royal observers observed a pattern of cruelty that permeated his play. He did not merely seek attention. He required it, frequently obtaining it through provoking and tormenting those unable to defend themselves. One of his initial forms of entertainment was provoking the stoic guards stationed by the monarch. At an age when most children might shy away from their formidable presence, Andrew confidently strode past them, ridiculing their stiff demeanor and making expressions to disrupt their composure. When they failed to respond, he became increasingly irate, intensifying his behavior in an attempt to compel their recognition. This was not merely innocent folly. It was a boy who believed that no norms applied to him, not even the unspoken discipline upheld by the men safeguarding his family. However, the true cruelty was demonstrated when he was not in opposition to individuals. Animals also suffered the consequences of his spoilt temper. Historical accounts depict him kicking the family dogs, chuckling at their yelps, and hitting the horses' legs with sticks for his own entertainment. The conduct so appalled the royal attendants that, on a certain day, they decided to take matters into their own hands. Seizing the young prince, they forcefully pushed him headfirst into a heap of manure and covered him with fresh excrement, burying him in the filth he had so gladly inflicted upon others. It was an inhumane punishment, but one they evidently believed he had merited. And that was not the sole occasion on which staff members deviated from regal protocol to address his errors. On a different occasion, his persistent teasing of a palace footman incited the individual to respond. He ultimately struck the youngster with sufficient force to cause a black eye. When the footman tendered his resignation, anticipating prompt dismissal, the Queen declined to accept it. Even she appeared to acknowledge that Andrew's conduct had deteriorated to such an extent of cruelty that disciplinary action was warranted, even if it originated from one of her own subordinates. His unpleasant demeanor extended beyond personnel and animals. Alongside his younger sibling, Edward, Andrew transformed each interaction into a competitive challenge. He openly bullied him by confiscating cakes, pushing him, and inflicting injuries. It was not merely playful horseplay between brothers. It was a display of dominance. To those who observed it, it disclosed a young boy captivated by the exhilaration of dominance, consistently seeking to demonstrate that he was in command. At school, his reputation preceded him like an unpleasant odor. At preparatory school and subsequently at Gordontown, Classmates nicknamed him Baby Grumpling due to his tantrums and the Snigger for his mean-spirited mirth at the expense of others. He did not embody the endearing qualities expected of a royal. He was the juvenile, indulged, self-satisfied, and consistently deriding. Even as he aged, his mindset remained undeveloped. It merely became more severe. Accounts circulated of him forcibly unzipping and disrobing female staff at palace functions and pushing their faces into food while mockingly instructing them to scent the partate. It exhibited the conduct of a bully rather than that of a sovereign. During camping excursions, he was reputed to sabotage the shelters of others by stripping down fly sheets and discarding them into rivers, thereby leaving his companions drenched and distressed. To Andrew, it appeared to be merely another hoax. For those who endured it, it was a profound experience of humiliation. Personnel who served under his supervision summarized it most effectively. He did not speak with the courteous decorum anticipated of a royal child. Instead, he cast objects onto the floor and issued commands infused with profanity, insisting, "Pick that up." To servants who were acclimated to discipline, restraint, and dignity, the boy's language was profoundly shocking. They perceived in him not a mischievous child, but a spoilt despot in microcosm. By the time he reached an age suitable for donning a uniform, Andrew's reputation had already been established within the confines of the palace. He was not the handsome heir like Charles, nor the determined yet competent Anne. He was the staff member whom everyone detested having to engage with, the infant whom they regarded as intolerable, a youth whose concept of enjoyment was cruelty, whose notion of respect was dominance, and whose arrogance appeared to intensify with age. They hoped he would eventually outgrow it. However, unfortunately, the situation continued to deteriorate further. By the late 1990s, Andrew's public facade had already begun to deteriorate. The scandals extended beyond mere rumors of temper. It concerned financial matters, women, and an arrogance that had become impossible to conceal. While his brother Charles was attempting to reinvent himself following Diana's death, Andrew was descending further into conduct that would permanently tarnish his reputation. One of the initial indicators of issues arose from his financial connections. His extravagant expenditures, driven by the privileges of his regal status, conflicted with his imprudent business endeavors. Reports emerged indicating his involvement in negotiations with individuals of dubious integrity, frequently including men under investigation in foreign jurisdictions. The royal family discreetly suppressed most of these reports, but rumors of financial arrangements for access persisted around him constantly. What initially started as minor favors for friends rapidly escalated into allegations that Andrew was profiting from his royal title by facilitating meetings for merchants in exchange for substantial payments. The palace denied the allegations. However, the paper trace continued to surface. Along with the money, his fixation on younger women also grew. Following his divorce from Sarah Ferguson, Andrew appeared unable to dispel the perception of a middle-aged man pursuing women significantly younger than himself. He publicly displayed associations with models and socialites, many of whom were scarcely of legal age and numbered in the thousands. His chauffeur once mentioned that he frequently observed nearly 10 women entering and leaving his residence in Bangkok. It was not merely humiliating for the family, it was also unsettling. Journalists began overtly referring to him as Randy Andy, a moniker that persisted for decades, diminishing the Queen's son to a subject of tabloid ridicule. Even within the palace, aides alluded to his failure to distance himself from unsuitable associates. Subsequently, his well-known association with Jeffrey Epstein ensued. Long prior to Epstein's apprehension, Andrew was observed at his residences in New York, his Caribbean estate, and aboard his private aircraft. Photographs of Andrew walking with Epstein following his initial incarceration have raised concerns that he has been unable to satisfactorily address. The issue extended beyond merely the association. It was his audacity. While other influential individuals distanced themselves, Andrew reaffirmed his association, describing Epstein as a loyal friend and asserting that he had no misgivings regarding their relationship. That solitary decision would ultimately lead to his downfall. However, Epstein was not the sole shadow cast over him. Within the palace walls, the servants were assembling their own confidential list of complaints. Maids expressed their dissatisfaction with being regarded as mere servants akin to those in a medieval court, rather than as laborers in a contemporary household. One maid recounted that Andrew compelled her to ascend 7 flights of stairs solely to draw the draperies, which were mere inches from his position. She stated that the abuse was continuous, verbal, demeaning, and intended to undermine them. He was again recalled shouting about a trivial error involving his teddy bears, asserting that only he was permitted to handle them. His conduct towards the Queen's staff was so infamous that some privately referred to him as the Prince of Darkness. Andrew did not merely issue commands, he demeaned others. Gardeners reported that he reprimanded them for leaves being improperly arranged. Drivers reported that he would vociferate when a vehicle was delayed by 5 minutes. A former equerry employee acknowledged that working for Andrew was akin to being a human pounding bag. These accounts, concealed for years, gradually emerged in the press, each depicting a more disturbing narrative than the preceding one. The public observed indications of this entitlement during his international journeys. As Britain's trade envoy, he was expected to represent the nation with dignity. Rather, reports depicted him reproaching foreign personnel, displaying disdain towards waitstaff, and insisting on accommodations akin to those of dictators rather than diplomats. At a particular event in the Middle East, he reportedly caused a hotel employee to become emotional by shouting about the temperature of his accommodations. Diplomats accompanying him acknowledged that managing Andrew's eruptions became an integral aspect of their responsibilities. His private affairs only intensified the sense of revulsion. Following Sarah Ferguson's personal scandals, such as being apprehended for accepting money in exchange for introductions to Andrew, the two appeared to be ensnared in a mutually detrimental and dependent relationship. They cohabited separately but remained legally married, maintaining the privileges of regal life while disregarding the dishonor they brought upon the monarchy. Critics alleged that they employed their titles as protective barriers while engaging in conduct that would have tarnished ordinary reputations. By the early 2000s, Andrew was descending into a state of turmoil. He was neither held in the same regard as Charles, admired to the same extent as Anne, nor even tolerated to the same degree as Edward. He was subjected to derision. His moniker changed from Randy Andy to Air Miles Andy following the revelation of his frequent misuse of taxpayer funds for private jet and helicopter travel on minor trips. Once more, the image was unequivocally incriminating. A man adhering to luxury, oblivious to how disconnected he appeared amid a Britain grappling with economic disparity. Each year, an increasing number of palace insiders chose to reveal their perspectives. They depicted a man fixated on social status, eager to associate with celebrities, and entirely devoid of self-awareness. Even during family gatherings, his hubris rendered him an outsider. Princess Diana was once reportedly observed to have stated that Andrew was the least intellectually capable of the Queen's sons, yet also the most entitled. For a change, even her detractors appeared to concur. The warning indicators were all evident: entitlement, temper, unhealthy friendships, and impulsive expenditures. However, no one hindered him. Protected by his mother's steadfast affection, Andrew gradually receded into obscurity, shielded from repercussions until Epstein's universe unraveled and implicated Andrew as well. That was the moment when the world perceived the prince not as a privileged noble, but as something considerably more sinister. The subsequent scandal would not only ruin Andrew's reputation, but also irreparably fracture his position within the royal family. The pivotal moment occurred in 2010. Jeffrey Epstein had recently been discharged from incarceration following charges of soliciting a juvenile. Most persons of influence sought to avoid him. Andrew acted in the contrary manner. He was captured on camera walking through Central Park with Epstein, smiling as if the controversy were irrelevant. That singular image erupted with the force of an explosion. For the first time, the public observed the Queen's son strolling alongside a convicted sex offender. Subsequently, Virginia arrived. In 2015, her name gained widespread recognition in the public domain. She accused Epstein of trafficking her during her adolescent years and alleged that Andrew was among the men she was compelled to have relations with. She recounted having met him on 3 occasions. Each time, she stated that it was organized by Epstein's associate, Ghislaine Maxwell. The most incriminating evidence was a photograph. Andrew with his arm around a 17-year-old Joy. Ghislaine beaming softly in the background. Andrew's response was a denial. He asserted that he had never encountered her. He even proposed that the photograph was fabricated. However, experts analyzed it and identified no indications of manipulation. The refusal merely enhanced his appearance of desperation. The palace was thrown into a state of pandemonium. For many years, they endeavored to protect him by issuing ambiguous statements and depending on the Queen's authority to suppress dissent. However, the evidence continued to accumulate. Flight records indicated that Andrew was traveling in the company of Epstein. Witnesses reported observing them together in London, New York, and the Caribbean. Every detail penetrated further into the regal veneer. By 2019, the pressure had escalated to a critical threshold. Andrew consented to participate in a BBC interview with the aim of restoring his reputation. What ensued was one of the most disastrous interviews in the history of the monarchy. It commenced with explanations so implausible that they rendered him a worldwide subject of ridicule. He asserted that on the night Geoffrey claimed to have met him at a London nightclub, he was actually dining at a Pizza Express in Woking with his daughter. He reiterated the detail as if it were an incontrovertible alibi, oblivious of how absurd it appeared. The internet erupted with memes, transforming a serious allegation into a spectacle. Then, the comment regarding perspiration followed. Ju remarked that Andrew was perspiring profusely while dancing with her. Andrew responded that he was experiencing a medical condition that inhibited his ability to perspiration at that time. The justification was so extraordinary and implausible that it immediately undermined his credibility. It was no longer merely denial. It was a misconception. However, the most unfavorable aspect was his manner of expression. Rather than extending sympathy to Epstein's victims, Andrew centered his attention on himself. He stated that remaining with Epstein following his release was practical. He described it as an error, but promptly remarked that it was advantageous because it provided him with the opportunity to terminate their friendship in person. To millions observing, it appeared as though he was justifying his proximity to a predator. The response was swift and unequivocal. The interview was characterized as a failure, a complete mishap, and a significant setback. Even the monarch was unable to safeguard him on this occasion. Within a few days, Andrew declared his intention to withdraw from regal responsibilities. It was a period of exile. For the first time in contemporary history, a senior sovereign was effectively exiled due to scandal. The damage extended beyond that point. Charitable organizations severed their associations with him. Universities revoked his honorary titles. Military organizations discharged him from their ranks. Andrew had transitioned from being the Queen's favored son to an individual whose presence was detrimental to all institutions associated with the monarchy. Nevertheless, Ju persisted onwards. In 2021, she initiated a civil lawsuit in the United States alleging that Andrew committed sexual assault. Andrew's legal representatives exhausted all efforts to have it dismissed, contending that she lacked grounds for the case, that he was safeguarded by legal technicalities, and that the allegations were unfounded. None of the efforts proved successful. A judge has determined that the case may proceed to trial. For Andrew, this signified a singular implication. He would either confront Jaffer in open court or resolve the matter through private settlement. In the beginning of 2022, Andrew reached a settlement. He paid Jupri approximately £12 million. The palace asserted that it was not an acknowledgement of culpability, but the public perceived it otherwise. To many, it appeared as though he had purchased his exemption from responsibility. Even more concerning, uncertainties arose regarding the origin of the funds. Some individuals surmised that the Queen herself had discreetly financed the transaction in order to safeguard the monarchy. By the time of Prince Philip's funeral, Andrew was observed in solitude, following behind his siblings. During the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, he was prohibited from making an appearance on the balcony. At her funeral, he was disrobed of his military uniform, standing uncomfortably while his siblings adorned theirs. Each moment served as the fulfillment of the petitions of all those whom he had harmed. That was not the case. At the instant Charles assumed authority, Andrew was divested of all remaining honorary military titles. He was informed that he would no longer serve as a representative of the monarchy in any official capacity. The gates to regal life were firmly closed. Even his security detail was reduced, compelling him to advocate for protection akin to that of an ordinary citizen. To Andrew, it was an indescribable humiliation. To Charles, it was imperative to undergo surgery to excise the infection and safeguard the monarchy. The 2023 coronation revealed the fracture clearly. Cameras recorded each moment of Andrew's humiliation. He arrived not wearing a uniform or ceremonial regalia, but dressed in the simple attire of a sidelined relative. His siblings moved with conviction, adorned in emblems of authority. Andrew shifted uncomfortably, his expression a facade of restrained wrath. Body language specialists observed a disparity between him and the rest of the family. The manner in which Charles scarcely acknowledged him and the way William refrained from making eye contact. Harry, despite his own controversies, appeared to be more widely accepted than the disgraced Duke. It was not the only occasion on which he experienced isolation. During the Easter service that same year, cameras once again captured the division. Charles and William advanced ahead, actively engaging with the throng, while Andrew lagged behind, ignored even by his own nieces and nephews. Each gesture and every gaze conveyed the narrative. Andrew had now become the specter of the royal family. However, exile from public life did not eliminate the private life that continued to be revealed. Now, additional staff members came forward with accounts that further intensified public disapproval of him. One asserted that Andrew would leave heaps of laundry dispersed throughout his rooms, expecting the maids to clean them without protest. Another individual recounted that he insisted on bathtubs prepared at exact temperatures, reprimanding staff if the water did not meet his specifications. A valet recalled being instructed to flatten Andrew's shoelaces using an iron. The details appeared preposterous, yet they exposed an individual overwhelmed by a sense of entitlement, disconnected from typical human conduct.